Hi, that's a picture of a very relaxed looking Rupert Murdoch. He's just been to see Les Miserables premiere in Sydney on the 21st of December 2012. Most of the governments across the globe are now happily established, and he has picked his friends for power. I'm going to show you something of the power of his organisation and how powerful it is, who the family members are who are involved, who the fraudsters are who are former family members, and names that appear now on the stock market as downright lies, as identity frauds, but as a really efficient way of manipulating the future of innocent countries like Russia, vast countries like Russia and China, by stealthy, wily, greedy, genocidal and ruthlessly greedy leadership teams that now own every media organisation across the globe and manipulate it relentlessly so that the peace-loving nations can never have peace. Okay, I'm just going to start scanning down, because when you look at the background to this family and you look at its links to elites around the world, even the schooling is astoundingly criminal and cabal-like. They bring together world leaders when they're in the primary and secondary sector. And I'd never heard of this before until I read about Murdoch's actual personal experience in the schools in the Melbourne area, I think. Let me just check that out. So I've got so many facts all lined up to try and impart to you, but I just want to stick to the rather primitive methods that they indoctrinate their people with. And the schooling that we're talking about for the Murdochs is the same schooling that Prince Charles receives, and I did not know that until earlier this week. Okay, Keith Rupert Murdoch was born 1931. He's aged 83, and he's a citizen then, when he was born, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. His citizenship was switched to the United States in 1985, but I'm now going to start scanning down and give you the highlights or lowlights of his career. He's got sister Janet Calvert-Jones, Anne Cantor. He's a Jew. Cantor is a notorious Jewish name, and you remember the cantor that used to sing about over there and the culling of Gentiles, Jews and blacks and anybody that they could get in a uniform when America joined the wars that both presidents, that's Woodrow Wilson and FDR, had promised that they would not be fighting in. What they need to take those countries to war is some detonating event like Pearl Harbor, or like the Jewish hatred and the campaign against the German markets that were conducted by Untermeyer and Brandeis, those first Jewish plants on the Supreme Court of America that tragically extended World War I by 2 full bloody genocidal years. Okay, so let's get down to where. So the timeline on this report in Wikipedia is all over the place. Murdoch himself spent 5 years in Britain between 1960 and 1974. That's way before he was a big power broker. He became a US citizen in 85, and he dismembered the UK reporting, the press system and the print runs in 1986 in a pitched battle with the British unions and in league with Mrs. Thatcher, the biggest right-wing presence in Britain possibly ever. with the exception of Winston Churchill, of course. Oh, sorry, I keep jumping too many steps down. Let's just get back onto the main frame and I'll take you up to find out about Murdoch's schooling. There we go, it's a wee bit quicker. So you can see family members there that are obscure names, because this man's been married several times, he's got loads and loads of children, and they're, when he's dead, are going to be fighting about the ownership of his vast empire. And he seems quite complacent that to have a fight on any issue is quite justified. He was very vocal on the need to brutalise Iraq, which is now being brutalised for the third time in a decade, right under his watch, with his entire approval. Okay, so here we are, we're back to where we lost the place just then. I'll scroll down in a more leisurely way. His parents were called Keith and Elizabeth. His relatives were Jean Calvert-Jones, his sister, Anne Cantor, a sister, Helen Hanbury, a sister, and his other relatives are famous in a Chipping Norton connection. That is Matthew Freud, the second husband of his daughter Elizabeth, and he's got a Sarah Murdoch as well, who's a daughter-in-law. And there are other wives that don't get a mention in that summary part of the Wikipedia. He, like most of the prominent politicians in Australia, are companions of the Order of Australia. Okay, so he moved to Britain. It's difficult to know exactly when. He's been there for periods between 1960 and 74, and he created the network TV B Sky B in 1990. It's immensely powerful. We've got details all over our tyrannous timeline for the New World Order of how powerful that is, how he's in league on those boards with Rothschilds, with the royals, with Prince Charles, and with the people who negotiate the government contracts. It is just amazing how corrupted the country is. Okay, so it profiles him as a citizen of Melbourne, and the son of Sir Keith Murdoch and Elizabeth Joy Green. Now, Keith Murdoch was a war correspondent and later a regional newspaper magnate, owning 2 newspapers in Adelaide, South Australia, and a radio station in a faraway mining town. Now that refers you to reference 4, and when you go to reference 4, it does not tell you anything about a mining town, how far away it is, so you're left to guess where his roots were. Probably the most prominent mining town in Australia is Perth, where he had loads of connections to Lord McAlpine, the former Conservative Party fundraiser. And in Perth, Lord McAlpine, the notorious paedophile who died earlier this year but has never been given a burial by the media, he runs an art collection which is a series of pictures of scantily clad nubile young girls, and it is deemed to be a work of art rather than the work of a deviant sexual paedophile. Okay, let's move down. I want to get you... Ah, shit, I've done it again. Okay, so this is straight from Wikipedia. You can go there yourselves and you can look at it. I'm going to give you insight into the consequences of his rise to power, and the people who were complicit in making him one of the world's most powerful people. Okay, so there's the bit about the faraway mining town again. So his wife was a debutante, and he saw her image in one of his own newspapers, then courted her, and then married her. Okay, they had the three daughters, Janet Calvert-Jones, Anne Cantor and Helen Hanbury. Okay, he also took his school's cricket team to the national junior finals. This is the same concept that media men and newsmen and Roman senators have been interested in for thousands of years. If you control the mob and you keep their attention with sporting events, then you can get away literally with the genocide that we will talk about later on. Okay, so his cricket team won the junior finals. He worked part-time at the Melbourne Herald and was groomed by his father from an early age to take over the family business. When he was 21, Murdoch returned from Oxford, yet the power base, with Harvard for a globalist education. He returned at the age of 21 and he started working on the Adelaide News, the Sunday Times in Perth, Western Australia, a prominent mining town on the other side of the country, where a person called Lang Hancox was in the process of building the Rio Tinto empire, which is now one of the biggest mining empires on the globe, largely owned by South Africans, Europeans, but with an occasional Australian thrown in, sometimes with a very fraudulent looking pseudonym. I'll explain that later. Okay, so we get now the transfer into the Daily Mirror in the UK in 1960, The Economist. Remember, I talked a lot about economic journals and the manipulation of economic journals and economic expertise in the lead up to the reset of 2008, and we've talked at length about profiteers in the UK, including Dame Helen Alexander, a university leader, the boss at Rolls-Royce, the boss at dozens of economic journals. She is an economist and a specialist in stealing from child victims in the university system in the UK. All of that is the capitalist dream shared by Murdoch. Okay? And he had a focus in all of those newspaper expansions in increasing the level of reporting of sports and scandal and adopting eye-catching headlines. You remember the stuff about the sinking of battleships in a war that was totally unjustified by Mrs. Thatcher? When they sank the Belgrano, the headline was "Gotcha," and when they needed diversion from financial crimes, they put a celebrity on the front page and they declare that he ate his hamster. It is childish, it is diverting, but it is exactly what the public want, so that they can be light-hearted like Rupert Murdoch and the sports fans that flood into the Colosseum but do not realise that they are wasting their children's future as they have a couple of tins of Fosters or something similar. Okay, so there we're beginning to see him help take over newspapers like the Dominion from the British Thomson twins, who have been the main stockholders of British news since Beaverbrook retired into the Côte d'Azur after they had celebrated Winston Churchill's 50th wedding anniversary on the Côte d'Azur at Beaverbrook's luscious and vast mansion that's right next to Monaco, yeah, right next to the Formula 1 motor racing, and everything they do is grandiose and right in the face of the public, but they don't give a monkeys as long as they can watch the cricket match or go to the races and squander their paltry earnings at those events. Okay, he's a friend, and his children are friends of the Packer dynasty that also used sport, professionalised it, made it inept and incompetent compared to the amateur ethics that drove sport all the way from the Greek Olympics right up to this 1960s era, when the taint of professionalism began to blight the world's capacity to be competitive. Okay, he took over a company called Mushroom Records, which is absolutely coincident in that era of the psychedelic craze, the launch of the New World Order bands, the Rolling Stones being the most prominent. Some of their concerts are the scenes of horrific murders and killings, and it is all driven by Gordon Wasson's launch of psychedelic drugs out of London and the Bloomsbury set. And you've got prominent in that development the development of psychiatric drug regimens which are hopelessly incompetent, like the practitioners of the psychiatric professions, but they don't not normally resort to drugs because they can use electrical therapies, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which was launched and developed by Canadian institutions using a Dr. Ewan Cameron at McGill as the leading light in that science for a couple of decades, funded entirely by the CIA. Those methods are still used by the US forces in Guantanamo, and they are used at psychiatric institutions all around the globe as portrayed in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Okay, political activities in Australia. Now, Murdoch is all over the place, but the public don't give a monkeys because they're happy with the cricket match, and they're happy with the rugby league, and they're happy with the Australian football or the rugby union. Whatever it is, it now consumes the whole of the calendar year on our TV screens with all 750 channels. When I left for New Zealand in 2004, there were 5 channels in Britain. Now the whole of the British populace are couch potatoes, and they don't know that they are being robbed blind. Okay, so he's a supporter of Menzies Holt and the Liberal Party. As you'll see, he's a supporter of the Conservatives, he's a supporter of the Labour movement, and he manipulates all of them in their pre-electoral pledges and in giving them bungs to be quislings and traitors to their country. So we've got Strain in the Cabinet, the Liberal. So here we get the mention of his supporter Goff Whitlam, who was involved in the gifting of his US citizenship. He went transiently to Britain, as we've heard, to disrupt the print runs, to make it electronic, to get rid of thousands of jobs, and to rile up the unions, and everywhere he goes he's just there to create a ruckus and to dismember society. Okay, he believes, what are we telling us here? So elected on a social platform. So Goff Whitlam got elected on universal free health care, free education for all Australians to tertiary level, recognition of the People's Republic of China, and public ownership of Australia's oil, gas and mineral resources. That's public ownership, nationalisation. Do you believe that the Rupert Murdoch that we see now believed genuinely in all of those things? That the citizens of the country owned the assets of the country? It did not last long, let me assure you. Rupert Murdoch's backing of Whitlam turned out to be brief. Murdoch had already started his short-lived National Star newspaper in America and was seeking to strengthen his political contacts there. That's capitalism, the capitalist dream, living the dream, the limited company. Okay, so let's scan down till we see another highlight. And what Murdoch does is very cleverly pretends to support every movement that ever exists, but leaves the decisions on what his newspapers believe to his journalists and his editors. In other words, he washes his hands of it like Pontius Pilate did on that important decision that all of them laugh at because they understand the 2,000-year-old religious joke and the power of manipulating minds by deception, which is what the free press do. The free press is in inverted commas. There he is, sitting looking very relaxed because he's amongst friends at the World Economic Forum, meeting in Davos in 2007. In 1968, Murdoch entered the British newspaper market with his acquisition of the News of the World, followed in 1969 with the purchase of the struggling daily broadsheet The Sun. Yeah, and those things are tied into the religious fraud, because the pagans worship the sun. Murdoch worships capitalism and human suppression and the thriving of the elites at the expense of the world's global populace. On acquiring it, he appointed Larry Lamb as its editor. Now you can see a trend here. Larry Lamb is a cartoon character in the lead up to that, and Rupert the Bear was Beaverbrook's favourite cartoon character when Beaverbrook was the propagandist in both British wars. Beaverbrook is actually a Canadian, trained in New Brunswick at the same time as Hitler was sparking the ethnic hatred and the Nazi movement and the anti-Jewish killings in a place called New Brunswick. They think it's really funny to be fascists together and to try and deceive the whole world. So Rupert the Bear was the cartoon character before Larry Lamb, and Larry Lamb is appointed as the first editor. Let's see what other jokes they perpetrate. So again, they're involved with Canadian newspaper publishers and Lord Thomson of Fleet. That's the Thomson twins and the Thomson publishing dynasty. Now we get the allegiance in the 80s and the 90s with Mrs. Thatcher and Major, and then the switch all of a sudden to the other pole of politics, to the Labour Party and its new leader Tony Blair. A meeting of minds and hearts and economic and political beliefs. Brown and Murdoch were in regular communication in the lead up to Brown's election and the replacement of Tony Blair, when Tony Blair had been promised the presidency of the EU for life as Gordon Brown crashed the worth of British gold so that he could make the euro have some sort of value in the open market. The whole thing is undermined by Bernie Ecclestone, the Formula One boss, who then coerces Blair into not being able to keep the money that the EU had given him to take over that very important crashing of the British gold stocks. And the whole thing is done for personal gain. None of it is about national prosperity, which is an emerging trend which will become very worrying towards the end of this video. Okay? Many on the political left in Britain alleged the collusion of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government with Murdoch in the Wapping affair as a way of damaging the British trade union movement. In 1987, the dismissed workers accepted a settlement of £60 million. We've got the launch of Sky and B-Sky B. By 1996, B-Sky B had more than 3.6 million subscribers, triple the number of cable customers in the UK. British financier Lord Jacob Rothschild, a close Murdoch friend since the 1960s, served as deputy chairman of Murdoch's B-Sky B from 2003 to 2007. The same batards take control of the Future of Russia Fund. With Lord Patten they have control of the Oxford Russia Fund, and there we have a token mention of Rothschilds in a 5.5% stake in Genie Oil and Gas. The genie represents the joke that is virtual. Yeah, it is fraudulent stock. There is no product. They just cheat people in the issuance of shares, then they crash the company using a series of companies that make fraudulent news, like Ingenious Films LLP or the Michael Grade empire of ITN networks, and all of a sudden you have millions of investors crying in their beer when the leaders of these scams begin to become millionaires, and the Rothschilds see to it that they become executives at the Bank of England. We talk about that in every video that we make. Everything that involves the issuance of money is now owned by these families and these elites. And then you get the menace and the protest movements around alternative production methods for shale gas and oil, and exploration in countries like Israel, supported by the Rothschilds since 1947, supported entirely so that the wealth of the Russian steppes and all of the oil producing countries in the Middle East and the OPEC countries could be manipulated at forecourts globally. Oil is and gas are renewables. They are made blessedly in the high pressures and temperatures at the Earth's core, and they bubble up to the surface, and the companies that produce this know this, produce gas and oil for the marketing, know this for centuries, for decades. It was discovered by the Russian scientists in the 1950s, so that was why the medias, led by people like Murdoch and Berlusconi, as you'll see later on, and Conrad Black in the Americas, they then had to perpetrate the myth that the oil came from dinosaur bones and fossils. It's a crock of shit. It is a profiteering lie, and it leads to wars on all continents, so that the greedy lust to take over and develop new oil and gas vents is manipulated by the media and becomes front page news and justifies the brutalisation of vast tracts of land. Okay, so News Corp has subsidiaries in, guess where? The tax havens. That's the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, the Channel Islands and the Virgin Islands. From 1986, News Corp's annual tax bill averaged around 7% of its profits. Now, one has no idea where it actually pays tax, because one is unaware that there would be any need to pay tax in any of the countries where they choose to trade, which is why they choose globalism instead. In the 1980s, Murdoch formed a close alliance with Conservative Thatcher, and the Sun credited itself with helping her successor, John Major, to win an unexpected election victory in the 1992 general election. That was when I was a student in London. My boss was a socialist in London at Thames Poly near Baroness Blackstone's empire, and when that election was won by the Tories against all odds, my boss had a massive heart attack and he had to have his heart replaced. I believe that he's still alive and well, and in 1997, 2001, 2005, Murdoch's papers were either neutral or supported Labour under Tony Blair. What a turnaround. You've got a new messiah that is spitting out the new mantra, and wherever they go, this man backs the winners. See the number of meetings that he had with David Cameron in the lead up to the 2010 election. In a 2005 speech delivered in New York, Murdoch said that Blair described the BBC coverage of Hurricane Katrina disaster as being full of hatred of America. Yet they just manipulate the minds. They want to be as divisive as they can be, and you should see what they have dreamt up on global warming and on think tanks further down this news page. Okay, Murdoch attempted in 1998 to buy Manchester United, which had been used as a diversion traditionally for decades. Busby Berkeley and the murders and the killings of people when he was in a drunken craze behind the wheel of his car, that led to the appointment of Matt Busby. The Berkeley babes in America were dancers with the silk stockings, like the French were in the Free French movement, in the profiteering in World War II. All of it is manipulated by the media. None of it we can know as truth, and all of it then leads to the scandals with the ownership of Manchester United in the last 6 to 18 months, the involvement of American bosses, the involvement of Katie Price and Fergie for the cover-up of the Fergie involvement of the bringing down of the 9/11 Twin Towers, so that these brutal media leaders could take the world into the conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and to sequester the last remaining central banks in Cuba, in I forget where Chavez was, but also in Afghanistan and Iran. Okay, they appoint new political leaders. The Shah's still in power. All of them are puppets for the G8 regimes. On the 28th of June 2006, the BBC reported that Murdoch and News Corp were considering backing new Conservative leader David Cameron, and they were alleged to have met, I think that will be reported in highlights further down the page. In 2006, Britain's independent newspaper reported that Murdoch would offer Tony Blair a senior role in his global media company News Corp when the Prime Minister stood down from office. Okay, so another switch in political affiliation. He's also accused by former Solidarity MSP Tommy Sheridan of having a personal vendetta against him. And you get people like that brought into the news, but then they become embroiled in celebrity programmes, like the man who won the Bradford election, I forget his name, another Scotsman, refuses to talk to me on Skype because he knows that I would tear him to bits. They are just quislings and plants that earn a large amount of money to look like middlemen between the political parties. Okay, I forget, I could maybe look it up on my other computer. I'll tell you who the other guy is in a few seconds. George Galloway. Yeah, George Galloway, kicked out the Big Brother house, addiction problems, back in power thanks to the Respect movement in Bradford, and then the heroic female who was behind that campaign of support for him gets pressure on her using the psychiatric methods that were launched by McGill, the ECT, the pressure, and the same type of stuff that saw the Ukrainian leader Ms. Tymoshenko cast into jail and heavily medicated on psychiatric drugs. A huge amount of weight gain for Ms. Tymoshenko during that same period. The whole world is so divided that her children and our grandchildren, or our children and our nieces and nephews, are actually on the executive at Gazprom. The world is so twisted, it's incredible. But as long as the guns are turned on innocents, they don't give a monkeys. And as long as the camera are trained on the Winter Olympics, the World Cup, or the Summer Olympics, and the opening ceremonies which openly laugh at genocide in wartime, using people like Mr. Bean, the war correspondent for Gallipoli, to open the London Olympics, and to play tunes involving religious sacrifice for people that refused to run on a Sunday but were killed in a conflict in China as innocents. They think it is really funny. In August 2008, British Conservative leader and future Prime Minister David Cameron accepted free flights to hold private talks and attend private parties with Murdoch on his yacht, the Rose Harty. Cameron has declared in the Commons Register of Interest he accepted a private plane provided by Murdoch's son-in-law, public relations guru Matthew Freud. Now, I believe that the cost of the jet was around £30,000, which is roughly what you would pay for a Mercedes, which is what Hitler got for free in the run-up to World War II. But I do not believe that you would get a jet for an aircraft jet for 30 grand. But that is what you're allowed to report in your own free press if you own it. Other guests attending the social events, 30 to 40 of them in the lead up to the election, included the then EU Trade Commissioner Lord Mandelson, the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, and co-chairman of the NBC Universal Ben Silverman. The Conservatives have not disclosed what was discussed. In July 2011 it emerged that Cameron met key executives of Murdoch's News Corporation 26 times during the 14 months that Cameron had served as Prime Minister. That's post-election. Yeah, all of it has to be declared on Hansard. None of it is. If it is, they just ignore it, like Zahawi's crimes, like Michael Moore's crimes, and everything that happens in both chambers of Parliament, because the statistician is Klaus Moser. He's a fraud. It's a joke about Santa Claus and Moses all at the same time. They make the news up and they fabricate the statistics so that they can continue to steal from the people, using people like Andy Coulson and Rebecca Brooks to do the spying on the people, and using things like T-Mobile, Vodafone, and all of the networking things that we now see in everybody's back bedroom, like Facebook, like Gmail, like McAfee, like the computer scanning devices. And everywhere you go in the retail world there is a camera trained on you. When these batards go to UN meetings or they go to NATO conferences, no one is allowed to train a camera on any of the influential speakers, and it's the same in Davos. The newspaper get to twist it before they publish it. None of the truth comes out about what the IMF, what the World Bank, what the ECB are doing with the world's funds, and what the central bank in Basel have done in peacetime and in wartime since the 1930s. Nick Clegg, Lord Ashdown, The Guardian, all of them, all across the parties, are corrupted. They're at the trough. Your party affiliation makes not a jot of difference. And then we get the whole country, when the treasury is emptied by its leaders, we have a phone hacking scandal which the newspapers are obligated to cover in great detail for months and months and months. And then when they appoint the chairman for the inquest, Lord Levison, and you look at his genealogy, he's related to the Dukes and Duchesses of Sutherland, who sent the colonists to the colonies for stealing bread and made room for the sheep. Yeah? And that is the reason why Merton College in Oxford is one of the richest colleges on the globe. Merton is the estate that the Sutherlands live on. And then the other second runner-up in the listing of rich colleges is the one where J.R.R. Tolkien went to, although that may have been Merton, I'm not terribly sure, but every one of J.R.R. Tolkien's characters is a criminal or a deviant in the world tyranny, like all of the Dad's Army characters, and a lot of the New World Order bankers, like Manwaring. Yeah, all of it is a vicious joke at the war dead's expense, and all of it is a wealth divide project for hundreds of years. The Rothschilds' sole ambition is to take over the issuance of money everywhere. They have now achieved it, and the only purpose for the medias that we're describing here is to cover up their financial crimes now. They get away with genocide again and again and again. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Syria, what's happening all around the world, and particularly in the brutalised Middle East, is that we are just diverting the world's people into a virtual terror threat, which is ISIS, Islam. All of it is made up by quisling people like my MP Michael Moore. It's all he had to say at the meeting in Kelso about what would happen at border control. They did not want us to have a competent country that was well funded. He will not talk about the fraud in 50 Lothian Road or any of the financial boiler rooms that I have dedicated my last 4 years of my unremunerated life to exposing as why all of our pensions in this potentially great country are busted by criminals in the cabinet. I might be getting short of battery life, so let's go down to the next highlights. It looks as if I might have fallen asleep when I was reading this bit, because I have not highlighted anything in this part. Oh, here's the News Corp bit. Intermix Media, Imagine Games Network. So they're into MySpace, virtual gaming, computer games. And in May 2007, Murdoch made a $5 billion offer to purchase Dow Jones, which I believe is the stock market registry, owned by Dow Jones for 105 years in the lead up to that, and at that time owned by the Bancroft family. Now that is also a joke, because you remember that the people who were evicted to the colonies lived in crofts. Ban the Croft family. In recent months, the richest woman in Scotland, who's Anne Gloag, has won a law case led by Levy and Macrae. The Levites are the people in the Old Testament who used to keep the kings and the leaders of the ancient nations and the representatives of the one true God. They would keep their administrative tent for them. And what Anne Gloag won is the right to chuck people off the land where they have had the right to roam for centuries, regardless of your ethnicity, your nationality. If you've got loads of money in your wallet, you'll be allowed to overcome that. And they created their stagecoach bus empire by spending their dad's redundancy money. That's Brian Souter and Anne Gloag. They were started by the redundancy money from our nationalised bus companies like the SMT. It is absolutely vicious that the working man and woman can turn on their fellow human beings and fellow citizens and fellow countrymen and tell them to get the fuck off my land, because I'm now rich and you are poor, and we're going to accentuate that divide in the next few years if you allow us to continue with it and you keep your head down on the sporting tournaments that we run. Okay, so Murdoch loves open immigration policies in Western nations generally and in the United States. Yeah, the pogrom, the diaspora from a fearful country to what looks like a rich and prosperous country, the migrant labour, the slave, yeah, all of it manipulated by news and news releases for centuries, all of it designed to steal from the citizens of a country the land that was theirs, and it is largely done by intimidation and brutalisation of those countries, the creation of a no-fly zone, which is actually a means of bombing that country and getting the emigres out into other cross-border regions where they then live in refugee flat pack homes provided by Miss Lagarde and the Bank Paribas, who she used to work for before she became a really hardened international criminal as the boss at the IMF. Okay, you've got people who endorse that type of emigration. You've got the whole of the Mexican nation trying to get across the border and into prosperous America, and they've got automatic weapons on the border to keep the number down. Okay, then you get the creation of the Quango. Now, Britain's had a queen of the Quangos. The outstanding example in history of the Quango is the Cato Institute. You remember the Peter Sellers films where they used to pretend that they were stealing diamonds that did not really exist other than in Hollywood? You should have a look at the list of diamonds that are much sought after and how much bloodshed has been associated with the acquisition of those Pink Panther diamonds and the likes and the equivalents of in several different continents. The Cato Institute was laughed at in those Pink Panther diamond films. Cato was the Japanese manservant who used to jump on his boss when he came home and entered his flat in the evenings. Cato is a political institute in the US, and it runs the US Chamber of Commerce. It is entirely divisive. It is entirely politically correct. It is there to keep people polarised and opinionated about things that don't really matter when they run the programmes right under the people's noses, and they take the US Army again and again and again to foreign fields only to bankrupt the US again and again and again, and to deepen its sovereign debt crisis and its incapacity to fund any public sector initiative that any president would want to do so he could be a populist. But what is more important now is knowing that if you try and be a populist and you put your funding back into democracy's cause instead of into the elite private owners who now manipulate all governments across the globe, then you will get what John F. Kennedy got in 1963, the last man to try and fund democracy using the obvious route of allowing democracy to issue its own money for all of its own initiatives and to leave other countries alone. The Wall Street Journal also wants increased legal immigration. It wants no minimum wage. It wants no government. It wants no interference. It wants what they have in South Africa still, at Lonmin and Lonro, where you can take the people in the pay round negotiations and just shoot them down right under the camera's eye, so that they will not protest next year, and that the lessons that were learned in Grangemouth in Scotland, that if you try and get your pay risen only by 1 to 1.5% in this 5 to 6 year pay freeze that we're imposing on you, that your job will be gone in 3 days. And they call the company that refuses to negotiate like that Ineos, which is a laugh at the writings at the top of Jesus Christ's non-existent crucifix 2,000 years before. They have been in control of those minds using physical intimidation and executions like that for all of that 2,000 year period. And so some, like Murdoch, and in some countries support immigration, in other countries they denounce it, and in other states you're all over the place. What they've launched now are all the political correctness movement, gay marriage, all this stuff on global warming, which is entirely a scam. Listen to the videos that John Patterson and I have made on the 2,000-year-old religious fraud, on the El Nino weather pattern scandal, on the killing by the Habsburgs of all of the blessed indigenous people that God planted on their own location on this earth before globalism culled them and blighted our prosperity globally and replaced it with downright greed. Now this is about the links between Murdoch's activities in Italia and his capacity to have a pretend tiff with Silvio Berlusconi. Silvio Berlusconi is the man who runs the Italian medias. Conrad Black runs the Canadian medias. All of them are in the same team, run by the Rothschilds, with figureheads at the level of Murdoch, Berlusconi and Black running the publishing empires, but declaring that they have nothing to do with it because they believe strongly in their editors. And when they kill their own journalists in the lead up to the Leveson inquiry, that's Shaun Hoare, then they quietly sweep that under any sort of inquest carpet, and all of the journalists understand entirely what happened to Shaun Hoare, portrayed as a suicide and too many drinks, alcoholic drinks, and an addiction problem. It's an assassination just like JFK's. The motives are plain, the methods are simple. Nobody has the courage to report it in their free press, which is why the free press is in inverted commas now, and our countries have no sovereignty and they have no national leadership at all. They only have profiteering traitors, picked for their coercibility and picked for their previous sins or evil behaviours. Murdoch started in 1993 Star TV, a Hong Kong company founded by Richard Lee. Lord Patton is now the boss at the BBC. Lord Patton may be dead. He had a massive heart attack on May the 17th. We have had no news of his progress ever since. They will not release the bad news for globalism or tyranny in case it creates a panic attack. Lord Patton came back from Hong Kong, having sold China down the Swanee, having fabricated the Tiananmen Square shenanigans, and then initiated the land grabs. The woman at Wooters Cloyters who has to get 2 million corporate lawyers into China within the next 5 years is Nancy McKinstry. The mission is just as vicious as the Trans-Pacific Trade Delegation's mission, and God is watching it just as closely. The day the Trans-Pacific Trade Delegation arrived in New Zealand in Christchurch was the day that they had the massive earthquake, and when they went to Japan a fortnight later, that was when the massive tsunami occurred. God knows everything that humans do on this earth and monitors it closely. I have no idea what gender God is, how many gods there are, whether or not we have gods for every planet in this blessedly beautiful universe, but I know they are powerful enough to create that universe, and they are powerful enough to put the petty villains that run our beautiful globe into the ground in their place. Okay, so Murdoch's began to launch into China and Asia in 1993. That project is now complete. Yeah. Now let's get on to his family members and his shareholders, because I've found some things that are worth a few questions here. This is a woman called Wendy Deng, I believe, and I think he's now divorced her, and I've found a woman on the board of Rio Tinto who's a dead ringer for Wendy, and her name is suggestive that she may even be. So the board members on Rio Tinto, which is the biggest mining company in the world, Gordon Bowden has intimated me that Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth is on the board, and if so, then she must be using a false identity, and one of those could well be Miss Anne Francis God be here. Do you get it? God be here. This is the humans. Queen Elizabeth II is God's representative in England by declaration, and with Justin Welby, a former oil executive and the son of Winston Churchill's private secretary, as the Archbishop of Canterbury in charge of the Church of England, and a lot of England's homeless, where they only get charged 60 to 80% interest on living in the hostel or in their rough and ready premises in the big cities, when most times they're bound to sleep on the streets. If they're returning troops, they could be legless or armless. They're pitiless, and they get no support at all from the country that dismembered them in NATO's armies. So I don't know who Miss Anne Francis God be here is. It looks like a joke to me. I do know that Petrus du Plessis and Lord John Olaf Kerr of Kinlochard have had lots of attention from me in recent videos. Look them up. They are massive criminals. They are behind the energy bills that are blighting every household in the UK and are sending the profits all across continental Europe to Iberdrola, to the hundreds of Ponzi subsidiaries of all of the big six energy companies, led by people like John Major, who privatised them in the first place, are now sitting soaking up the funds on their boards. But then there are a few other names. Okay, appointed to the board of Rio Tinto in 2014 was one Miss Anne Marie Alice Laveron. Despite what Gordon Bowden has told us about that woman's crimes and his exposure of those crimes using Swiss investigators in Geneva or the big cities in Switzerland that are bound to neutrality since the Nazi gold became a topic, yeah, they have now appointed Miss Anne Marie Alice Laveron to their board on the 15th of March 2014. Now that still means that so these are lists still on the Rio Tinto board. There's Leslie's, there's O'Leary's, there's Gronfeld's, there's a Clifford, there's a Gordon Home, There's a Dennis Hartley Henderson. There's a Sir Donald Claude Tebbit. There's a Sir Richard Brooke Sykes, former boss at Imperial College London, at Glaxo Wellcome, my old boss in fact in the pharmaceutical industry. The name that I'm looking for, here we go. Okay, the name that makes me raise my eyebrows when I think about Wendy Deng is Miss Annette Vendelbo Lawless. When you look at her image and you look her up on Google, she's an actress. She makes horror movies. She's a dead ringer for Wendy Deng. And Vendelbo, it just has that little aura of fraud. Here are the pictures. So Wendy and Murdoch were married on the 25th of June 1999. She was 30 and he was 68. She went to Yale School of Management and she was a newly appointed vice president of Star TV. And Murdoch has two daughters with her, Grace and Chloe, born in 2003 and 2001. Murdoch has 6 children in total. His eldest child, Prudence MacLeod, was appointed on 28 January 2011 to the board of Times Newspapers Limited and the Sunday Times. And now we're getting down into the directorship reports for all of these people. I've got them all logged and registered. This is, ironically, this one is registered in 3 Thomas More Square. You remember Thomas More, the saintly person who tried to stand up for Christianity when the Church of England was being launched? Now Thomas More, like everyone who could speak Latin, must have known that the whole of the Church of Rome was a fraud since its inception in 79 AD. Yeah, we've got a nice little myth there, and we've got things that live on in history, make excellent Hollywood movies. Thomas More has been a heroic figure of mine in the lead up to me discovering that Christianity is a total fraud for several decades, and it's inspiring to see people beheaded for a good cause. But when you realise that all of the elites who could speak Latin shared the joke about the Christianity being an entirely profiteering exercise, then you see the evil that is the Zionist and the Christian Holyrood, because there's no difference between religious divide. It's entirely for profit. The Vatican and the Jewish leadership teams, who are the Rothschilds, because they opted for the Jewish nation from their Eastern European homes when the Christian mission was sweeping in there, so that they could then favour the anti-Semitic claim. And you could have religious martyrdom for Christianity, you could have martyrdom for Jews. Who gets martyred is unimportant as long as they are poor and as long as the elites get to share the secret about the mind control. How you get your soul saved if you give up your cash and you stay poor so that the elite mansions can be inhabited. The colonists can have their loaf of bread in the colonies, but you cannot walk on Anne Gloag's land in Perthshire because her dad used to work for a nationalised bus company. It is sick. The working man is a slave. The elites are slave masters for centuries, and they are genocidal to boot, and all of it is covered up by an entirely corrupted set of media leaders, all of which get denounced in every country that you inquire into. Now I've got a list of directorships for Lizzie, for Lachlan, for James, and for all of the other Murdoch children. They are immensely powerful, and if you look at a list of interlocks that they have, you find that they interlock with the owners of the Future for Russia Fund, which includes Henry Kissinger. They interlock with the Rothschilds themselves. They interlock with the Prince's Trust, with William Hague, his wife and his sister. They interlock with all of the other royal families, Baroness Heather Rennick Bridgestock. I could keep going on for ages. James Rupert Murdoch, Jeff William Randall, stock marketeers, Rebecca Mary Brooks, Professor George Lawrence Brock, Right Honourable Lord Stephen Gordon, Cato, like the Cato Institute. All of it are obfuscation tools for their financial crimes and their vicious, ruthless circles of friends. Let's keep going. Let's see if we can find another. So that's the Times holdings, and this is an employee summary. This is for the Sun Lachlan. His businesses are still registered and still alive in Australia, in Fife in Scotland, and in the USA, where there's no means of regulating anything that he does or any of the taxes that they pay. They don't pay any taxes at all, and their net worth is grossly underestimated on the Wikipedia profiles. We're now looking at images for Matthew Freud, Sigmund Freud, and the fathers of psychoanalysis. They are married in the Chipping Norton set to Elizabeth Murdoch, but they are in a state of panic now. Both Jeremy Clarkson and the Freuds and Lizzie Murdoch are in the dissolution of their marriages, and that reflects my situation, because I'm brave enough to break up these cabals without having any income stream, and my family are deserting me for that reason, because I'm big enough and bold enough and informed enough to know that these are criminals and that they own the entire world, and all that needs to happen is that their constituents and the people that live near them, that work like slaves for a pittance, just need to turn on them. All it takes is a couple of pitchforks, and their knees are knocking, and they will fail to show up at the draft board the next time they want to cull your children. Murdoch has 2 children with Wendy Deng, and Tony Blair is Grace's godfather. It's all cosy and comfy until the citizens wake up to the wealth divide plot. Murdoch and rival newspaper and publishing magnate Robert Maxwell are thinly fictionalised as Keith Townsend and Richard Armstrong in The Fourth Estate by Jeffrey Archer. Jeffrey Archer is the man who schooled Nadim Zahawi. He stole £50 million in George Poppy Bush's first onslaught into Iraq and Kurdistan, and Zahawi now runs 13 or so companies out of the House of Commons, and he is the MP for Stratford-on-Avon. He's a Kurd, and he accuses his native people of war crimes when he is still brutalising and profiteering from that country as we continue to bomb it with the blessings of all of these quizzling traitors, so that they can line their pockets. Zahawi earns £500 an hour basic for his consultancy skills. He does not do any work as an MP, but he has a website with Anne Clwyd that uses the word indict as if they are pulling war criminals up for the crimes that they have committed. He is the biggest war criminal on this earth. And when I asked Sonia Poulton, an activist and someone who pretends that she would behead the Queen given the chance, whether she knew about Zahawi's crimes, she said yes. She knows all about them, but she does nothing about reversing them. According to Forbes 2013, Murdoch is the 33rd richest person in the US and the 91st richest person in the world, with a net worth of $13.4 billion. The transactions that they enter into in the virtual products frauds are massive, which is why they own the central banks in every country. These are guesstimates. They are hopelessly underestimated, and the reason that all of the participant countries are in hyperinflation is because these people are sloshing electronic and fiat currency and stock market flotations into an unregulated world and devaluing the worth of everything that the ordinary citizens would be able to afford were it not for the pay freeze that is imposed entirely on them as innocents, as local council workers, as public sector workers, as school teachers, as university leaders. Not leaders, the leaders are filthy rich. The ordinary punters who do the teaching and the research, which gets no funding at all now, like the pensions, because all of these things are corrupted by the world leaders by design. Okay, and I think I'll stop there now. I'm down to the references. There's reference 4, where we were supposed to learn about the distant mining town. There's nothing about a distant mining town. There's a reference to divorce from Wendy Deng, and that Wendy Deng could be Miss Lawless on the board of Rio Tinto as a joke. Goodness knows who the Queen is, and Gordon Bowden, for some unknown reason, has lost my friendship since I learned that Jacqueline Chan, the person who was fighting for the name of the murdered brother at the Abbey National Bank. But when I asked Gordon, is this Dr. Jacqueline Chan, the director on these 6 entrepreneurial healthcare companies, the same as the Jacqueline Chan that we tried to make videos on that banking killing? He would not reply. That was the last time I heard from him on Skype, and Gordon knows what his motives are, and everything that we reveal here about Anne Laverone implies that what Gordon has been doing has gotten out to the world, but either the world leaders have changed her status, or the things that we heard about the Swiss regulators and her being locked up for her crimes against investors, it's either fabricated or they have changed the transcript in the last 5 to 6 weeks since Gordon had his little tiff about the decision, about did he understand the joke that I made about when he was a rugby captain, did he know what the options were when they tossed the coin? He pretended that that was an offensive remark, and I would love to have Gordon back on my side, because he knows a lot more about the ownership of Rio Tinto than I can at this stage. But the fact that he's refused to work with me on it means that the whole of the free world could potentially never be freed. So there's a plea to Gordon. Thank you for writing to me by email this week, and thank you for saying that the newbies are actively involved in trying to expose these crimes. I would love to be involved with the old bees and the genuine people who fight for their country and are loyalists for the pension funds, for all of the people, and not just the opportunists that switch between the sides when the cash bung is at the right level. Anyway, I'm going to stop now because I'm going to run out of batteries on my camera. All of that came from Wikipedia. The pictures of Wendy Deng and the woman who's Miss Lawless on the look up Miss Lawless on the let's see if I can find the pictures of that. She makes horror films, and she's a dead ringer for Wendy Deng. And if you go to company check and look up Lawless, oh, there she is. Can you see those images? So Murdoch with his third wife Wendy, and there we have the pictures of Miss Lawless, and there we have the picture of Wendy. It may not be the same person, but yeah, I do not know who those people are on the board, and the person God Be Here, I cannot find anything on God Be Here in Wikipedia or in any of the search engines. Not in the Forbes Rich List, it's not in Debrett's. It is a fabrication, and I believe that they will just slot people in like that. And I got very excited about finding a Juan Carlos on the board of some of the energy companies like Iberdrola, but that turns out to be someone who is legitimately planted on the board, but whether or not that is a false creation and a false identity, one can only guess. And I've made several videos about making false identities and making yourself a billionaire on the stock market in companies like Whittington in London, where you've got a person called Stephen Clarence Hancocks, who's a multi-millionaire, who's on the Forbes Rich List, but you can find nothing in the world's press on that person since he became famous. He's not in the peerage either. No doubt all of that will change, like the news on the Islamic threat, as they try and force us into World War III to cover up again the ruthless propaganda and all of the lies that these people tell to keep the power base corrupted and to keep the countries impoverished and bankrupt. It is tragic. All you need to do is to get your head out of the TV screen and to work for your own children. I'm going to stop now because I'm getting offensive to the innocent people of the world who just need to rise up and to realise that they are being robbed blind by their political representatives.